The night was quiet at Ahmedabad's airport. A gentle breeze moved across the tarmac, carrying the scent of jet fuel and distant rain. It was just past 1 in the morning on June 13, 2025. The big, beautiful Boeing 787 stood waiting. This was Air India Flight AI-171, ready for its journey into the dark sky. Families said their last goodbyes, hugging each other tightly under the dim airport lights. Friends promised to call as soon as they landed. The air was filled with the usual mix of excitement and a little bit of sadness that comes with leaving. The plane looked strong and safe, its white body shining. The passengers began to board the aircraft. They walked up the ramp, their footsteps making soft sounds. Some were tired, their eyes heavy with sleep. Others were full of energy, looking forward to their destination. A young couple held hands, whispering about the new life they were starting. An old man clutched a small bag, perhaps carrying gifts for his grandchildren. Each person carried a story, a reason for their journey in the middle of the night. The flight was scheduled to take off at 1:10 a.m., a time when the world outside was mostly asleep, unaware of the lives gathering inside the metal bird. The cabin doors were sealed, shutting out the sounds of the airport. The flight attendants walked down the aisle, their smiles calm and reassuring. They went through the safety instructions, their voices a familiar rhythm against the low hum of the plane's systems. Passengers settled into their seats, some already closing their eyes to rest. A child looked out the small window, his face pressed against the cool glass, watching the ground crew move away like tiny figures in a play. The engine started with a low rumble that grew into a powerful roar, a promise of the journey ahead. Slowly, the giant plane began to move. It taxied away from the terminal, its lights cutting through the darkness of the airfield. It moved with a steady grace, like a great creature waking from a long sleep. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, announcing their imminent departure. For those on board, everything felt normal. It was just another flight, another trip across the sky. The plane lined up on the runway, its powerful engines ready to lift everyone into the vast, starry night. The moment of takeoff was near. Inside the cabin, things did not feel quite right. The air was warm and sticky. The air conditioning was not working, and passengers fanned themselves with magazines and safety cards. Beads of sweat formed on foreheads. People looked around, their faces showing their discomfort. They had paid for a comfortable journey, but the cabin felt stuffy and close. It was a small thing, but it was the first sign that something was amiss. The crew assured everyone that the air would cool down once they were in the sky, but the words did not bring much comfort to the restless travelers. The problems did not stop with the warm air. Many of the small screens on the back of the seats were dark. They would not turn on. Children who had been excited to watch cartoons were now disappointed and fussy. Adults who had planned to watch a movie to pass the time stared at the blank screens. The cabin lights flickered in some sections, and in others, they would not work at all. The call buttons above the seats were also not responding. People felt a growing sense of frustration. These were not the signs of a well-maintained aircraft. One man, sitting near the back, grew very upset. He took out his phone and started recording a video. He spoke to the camera, his voice filled with anger. "Look at this," he said, pointing his phone at the broken screen and the dark lights. "The AC is off. Nothing is working. Air India is one of the worst airlines in the world." He wanted to show everyone the poor service. He felt cheated. His words were harsh, born from the frustration of a journey that had started so poorly. He had no idea how little these small problems would matter in just a few minutes. The flight attendants tried their best to calm the passengers. They brought water and offered polite apologies. They moved through the hot, dim cabin with forced smiles, trying to maintain order. But a feeling of unease had settled over the plane. The broken systems made people feel insecure. They were about to fly thousands of feet into the air in a machine that seemed to be falling apart on the ground. The initial excitement of the journey had faded, replaced by a quiet worry that lingered in the stuffy air. The Boeing 787 raced down the runway. Its engines screamed as it pushed against the earth, finally lifting into the black sky. For a moment, there was that familiar feeling of relief as the wheels left the ground. The plane was flying. The lights of Ahmedabad twinkled below, a beautiful carpet of gold and silver. But the feeling of peace did not last long. Just 14 seconds after takeoff, the aircraft made a sudden, unusual dip. It was not like normal turbulence. It was a sharp, sickening drop that made stomachs lurch and hearts pound. A few people gasped. The pilots in the cockpit fought to control the plane. Alarms blared, red lights flashed across their panels. They pulled on the controls, their training taking over, but the plane was not responding as it should. It was a struggle against a machine that had its own terrible will. For the passengers, those few seconds were filled with confusion and fear. They gripped their armrests, their knuckles turning white. The gentle climb had turned into a terrifying fall, and no one understood why. The world outside the windows was a blur of darkness and distant lights. Then, just 30 seconds after it had left the ground, there was an explosion. A blinding flash of light lit up the night sky, followed by a deafening roar that tore through the air. The right engine had blown apart, sending fire and metal hurtling through the darkness. The plane shuddered violently, a final, awful tremor. For those inside, time seemed to stop. There was a moment of pure, silent terror, a collective intake of breath before the world was torn apart. The journey was over before it had truly begun. In less than a minute, it was all finished. From the moment the wheels lifted off the runway to the final, catastrophic end, only 59 seconds had passed. The wreckage of Flight AI-171 fell from the sky, a rain of fire and debris, crashing into the fields just beyond the airport. The bright lights of the city were now hidden by a thick cloud of black smoke. The quiet of the night had been shattered by a tragedy so sudden, so complete, that it left nothing but silence in its wake. There were no more voices, no more cries, only the crackle of flames. On the ground, chaos erupted. The sound of the explosion echoed through the nearby villages. People ran out of their homes, their eyes wide with disbelief as they saw the fiery glow in the distance. Ambulances and fire trucks raced towards the scene, their sirens wailing in the night. Rescue teams from the NDRF and the Indian Army were called in, working quickly in the difficult terrain. The hospitals in Ahmedabad were put on high alert, preparing for the worst. The scene was a nightmare of twisted metal, smoke, and the desperate search for survivors in the darkness. For those who had missed the flight, the news came as a terrible shock. A man named Chauhan had been running late. He arrived at the airport just 10 minutes after the gate had closed, angry that he had missed his flight. When he heard what happened, his anger turned to a cold, trembling feeling of relief and guilt. He was alive because he had been late. Another family had been saved by a traffic jam. They sat in their car, frustrated by the delay, not knowing it was keeping them safe. These people were the lucky ones, their lives spared by a simple twist of fate. The survivors who were pulled from the wreckage were few. Their stories were fragments of horror and confusion. They remembered the dip, the flash of light, and then nothing but pain and darkness. One person spoke of jumping just before the impact, a desperate act of survival. Each survivor was a miracle, but their bodies and minds carried the deep scars of the tragedy. They were alive, but they would forever be haunted by the faces of those who were not. Their second chance at life came at a cost that was too heavy to bear. In the days that followed, the story of Flight AI-171 became a somber tale whispered across the country. It was a story of broken lights and stuffy air, of a flight that ended almost as soon as it began. It was a story of the people who were saved by chance and the many who were not. The crash served as a harsh reminder of how fragile life can be and how quickly everything can change. The empty seats at dinner tables and the silence in homes that were once filled with laughter were the true, lasting legacy of that tragic night.